So good morning and welcome to NHS Dorset's board meeting. We've got apologies from Sam Crowe, Director of Public Health, and Simone Yule, Primary Care Partner Member, and also Manish Tayal, who's the Interim Non-Executive Director for NHS Dorset. Welcome to John and Jonathan on the screen. Is Drew on as well?
Not yet.
Okay,
Graham's
all right.
on.
Graham's on. Yeah, welcome Graham. And who's in the bottom right-hand corner or the left-hand corner now?
We've got
Who's that?
There's Nick.
No, on the left.
Tim has joined us for our patient story.
Oh.
Great, welcome Tim. Okay, so we have got public in attendance. So we've got Sam Best, the Principal Lead for Children and Young People, is here. Hello, Sam, again. We've got Gorika Kapoor, Deputy General Manager. Hello, Gorika, for Cancer Care. And Siobhan, shadowing Siobhan Harrington, sorry, Gorika, and then Michelle Whitehurst, Activa Healthcare Company, whom I don't see yet, but we are expecting.
So Siobhan hasn't arrived yet because there's a road traffic accident
I
on
hear
the
there's-
A35 and
yeah,
she's
she's
been sat there for
blocked.
2 hours. So
Oh, poor thing.
um,
Yeah.
we don't know when she might arrive.
Okay. And I think that might explain some of the other gaps that we've got here. And then virtually, we are being joined on live stream by Jordan Howard from a KCM group, Chris James from Medicare Plus, Steve Leggett from Alcedon, Neil Manson from Roche, Debbie Monkhouse, a member of the public, Mark Orchard from Portsmouth Hospital, CFO, and Gerald Rigler, Chair of Purbeck and Poole Group of Dorset CPRE, Diane Smelt, Member of the Public, David Smith, Member of the Public, Councillor Jill Taylor, and Andy Tibbs. Okay, for the purposes of this meeting, I think we are quorate. Natty, could you just confirm, please, given that Siobhan's not here?
All this.
Sorry, Liz. Are we quorate?
Yes.
We are, thank you.
Just to confirm, Drew's just joined us now.
Hi, Drew. Yeah, I think so. First meeting, isn't it? So, Liz, is this your first meeting?
First formal board, yes.
Yes. So, I think, could you introduce yourself to everybody, please, so that we know who you
Yeah,
are?
of course. Hello everyone, I'm Liz Bissell, I'm the new company secretary.
Thank you. And I think this is Ben's first meeting in person, but you have joined us on the screen before. But would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Ben Dr. Charles, I'm a GP over in Bournemouth and Primary Care Partner Member and Deputy Chair of the Dorset GP Alliance.
Thank you very much. And Debbie was here last time, wasn't she? Okay. Oh, you weren't? Okay.
Oh, wait, oh no, you weren't.
So, Debbie, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Debbie Simmons and I'm the Chief Nursing Officer, and I think it's my first board in public I've done a board.
Great, and welcome to you all. Thank you very much.
Someone's just joined us on the screen.
Okay. Simone, I had you down as an apology, but I'll take that off because you're now with us on the screen, so I've revised that.
Well, I'm a sort of apology. I'm just attending remotely because Dorset is in America, I think, but I am also a duty doctor, so I'm just going to sit in the background and support Ben when he needs it.
Thank you very much, Simone. Okay, right. So are there any declarations of interest? Can I just check for the people on the screen that you can hear? You can hear us properly? Thank you very much. Thanks for the thumbs up. Right, so let's go to the minutes of the last meeting on the 1st of September. Yay! Hi, Siobhan. Sorry about your journey. Right, so can I take us through? I'm going to turn the pages. So for accuracy, page, starting on page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Rob.
Sorry, Joe, I don't know what page but it's section 9.3.6. I'm not 100% sure that's the right way round or correctly describes it actually. So I've just asked a question this morning, so I'm getting a little bit of clarity on it. So is it okay if I come back and explain when I know?
You're talking about the BCP ICB relation to funding adult
Yes.
and children's
Yeah.
social care?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine. So if you can
I'll
come back
look into
to-
that and come
to-
back with the
that's
correct.
really helpful.
Sorry.
Thank you. 11, 12. So apart from that one amendment that Rob will come back to us on, I take the rest as an accurate record of the meeting. Thank you very much. And then matters arising. So all of the matters arising have been included, but Patricia, did you want to pick anything in particular up?
No. No, I don't think there's anything particular that we need to
I think
focus
most
on.
of the
Everything's
actions
pretty
are covered there.
self-explanatory,
Yeah. I think what might be helpful moving forward is if we can have an action log, so we've got it all in one place, then that will be really helpful. So thank you, Liz, if you
Lizzie's
could do
going to
that.
pick that up in future.
Perfect, thank you. Okay. So unless there's anything else on matters arising that anybody else wants to raise, then can I move us on to the patient's story? And Debbie, I think you're going to do the introductions, aren't you?
I am, thank you. So as board members will know, we've done a fair amount of international recruitment to support our workforce challenges, and so we thought it would be really helpful to have a video story with feedback from some of our international recruits to give us a feel for what it means for them and what it's felt like for them at the process. It's quite a long video, but it actually does give us some real food for thought, so hopefully we can have a discussion afterwards, because I think there's some significant learning. So I'll leave it on to watch the video first, and then we can perhaps have a discussion.
Thank you.
So nationally, that there is a reduction in people coming through to join the profession for nursing. There was a small peak during the pandemic, so we are expecting a little increase in a couple of years of people who've joined through the university, having seen what nursing can give and what a great profession it is. The domestic pipeline in the UK is just quite small at the moment, and so with healthcare advancing, big buildings going up like the Beach building, and new services being built, there's a need for more nurses. So we have growing workforce demands and a reduced pipeline domestically, which means that looking internationally to support nurses coming through is a good thing for us to do.
And the second day, that's when reality hit me that, I have left everything. I'm now migrated here. I don't know anything. I don't know about the money. I don't know about the people. I don't know where to find the shops. I don't know how to find certain things that I need. Even though we were being, the host that we were placed with was supposed to assist us. My host wasn't in particularly so assisting in that area. Yeah, so I had no idea about a lot of the technologies and stuff like that. So it was really, really hard. Transportation was the worst. I had to walk 20 minutes to the bus stop every morning, every evening back. And oftentimes, like, it was time like this last year, I had no idea that night, the dark is at 3:30 and 4 o'clock. So I'm coming off at work at 5, because I was working 9 to 5 then. And I used to be in the dark, walking through an alleyway to get to my house. Like, it was really a scary experience, that for me.
So one of the common issues, particularly in the southwest of Dorset, is accommodation, affordable accommodation. We've been working with our councils very much to try and look at how do we encourage developers to develop affordable housing. So the rental market is a real problem within West Dorset, affordable rental. But also affordable housing, full stop. The other problem we've got in southwest Dorset in particular is public transport, or the lack of public transport for shift workers. So that requires people to be able to drive a car if they're going to live away from the trust, i.e. outside of Dorchester, not within a walking distance.
The trust is, the managers are very supportive to us, actually. I feel the support since I arrived here from day one. The support from the education center, from the recruitment, and also from the managers. I experienced a lot of challenges when I arrived here. So on the first placement of the first ward that I was assigned to, it's a bit of a struggle for me, to be honest with you. There's a lot of things to consider, and it made me had some struggles with, or it affected my mental health. And but the good thing is my manager is very supportive of me. So she has given me time to relax and have time to unwind for a few days. And then I managed to transfer into a different ward where all the people there are very supportive as well. So I was relieved by that time. So I feel that I was welcomed into that new wards, and my manager is very supportive as well. And all the staff here, the education center, the freedom to speak up Guardian, they also made a big difference, like with the support that they're giving us. So that helped me a lot to settle in here for the year that I've been staying here for now.
The other key challenge for individuals is not the English language, but the words we use to describe something where that may not have existed in the country they have come from. So it's really important, again, we listen to them and not assume that discharge for planning, for example, is done everywhere in the world, because it isn't. So we need to work through and listen to our international recruits as to what's normal for them and how we need to help them adapt into the NHS.
I was working as a physiotherapist in India from 2019, and worked in like specialty hospitals and rotations, and then a bit of time working in elite sports in India. But during that time, I was always looking at options to move abroad for better quality of life and work-life balance, because that was something that we didn't get much in India because of we were working 51 hours a week, for example. So I was just looking for more balance and more financial stability. It was not smooth sailing, let's put it that way, in the sense that I did not come as part of the international recruitment program, but I was a direct international recruit. But nonetheless, there was not an international recruitment program for allied health professionals at the time when I was recruited. So there was very little support into my move over here, in the sense that I had to apply for my visa by myself. I had to book my flight tickets by myself. I had to arrange for a cab from the airport to Shaftesbury from India without knowing the situation in the UK. I had to find accommodation for myself from India. Thanks to the internet, I was able to book a temporary accommodation for 1 month, and then also arrange for a lodging agreement afterwards, and things like that, which I had to do by myself. So it was not smooth sailing. When I came here, I had to open a bank account. There was documents that were necessary for it, and I didn't have all of them, and so only certain banks were I was able to open an account with. So lots of things like that, which needed a lot of research in the background, which thankfully I was able to do, but not everybody might be. So those were the blocks, and those were the things I feel like we could improve on, in the sense that if we were to give that support, it would be a much more easier transition into the UK.
Well, I am from Kerala, so it's a small town, and it's a small a state in India. After completing my experience, I thought it was my dream to work abroad, to get more, because we were actually following the textbooks and knowledge from here. So I was always dreaming, oh my God, I really wanted to work there, So, and I've heard about a lot of opportunities coming from the NHS. So I have been Googling and seeing what are the new opportunities coming in. So I was actually looking to go to the ITU, but I think there was no vacancies. So I started with the IELTS preparation. That was the first barrier we have to cross. That is the language requirement. We need to score a 7 for all the writing, reading, listening, and speaking. But I, for 3 or 4 times I failed for my IELTS examination. But that was the first, the first stepping stone to come here. But I keep on trying. So for 1 month intensive coaching I have attended, at last, I think 4th or 5th attempt, I managed to pass my LTS coach training with an overall band of 7.5. I managed to get the required score. And after that, the next step is computer-based test, CBT, which is somewhat like a theory. It is like a theory and practical knowledge what we have about the nursing and the basic anatomy and physiology. I was able to pass at the first attempt. And after completing this, the next thing is the interview, which hospital that we have to work with, which place. So I was not having any friends, at that time. So I was a bit confused. I don't know which place is, comfortable I was always with my parents, and this is the first experience staying away from my family. So I was a bit worried, It was a very nerve-wracking thing.
The international recruitment programme at Dorset Healthcare is now moving into its second year, and we've been making lots of changes along the way to improve the experience for all our international staff joining us. Since our first physio arrived at the beginning of the year, we recognised the importance of including our AHP colleagues into the international recruitment programme, really to ensure that they have the same experience, the same support, and the same relocation help that we have always offered to our international nurses. We've now recruited a dedicated pastoral support worker. So she works within the international recruitment team, and she supports them pastorally throughout their entire journey. So she'll meet them via Teams before they arrive in the UK. She'll support them with their travel arrangements to the UK, and then me and her will meet our new arrivals when they land in the UK. We'll meet them the next day to help them get their visa card and open a bank account, and we'll then support them again through their first clinical day in their new clinical area. We know that when we interview international staff and they're successful at their interview, that we're not just giving them a job offer, we are offering a whole life change for them, and it's really important that we understand and they understand the impact of that, and that additional work and support that we can offer is really vital. So what's clear is that everyone will find it challenging to adapt to living and working in the UK. And everyone's individual, and so everyone will have their own personal journey and their own personal challenges. And we're here to support them through all of that. But we'll often find that there are key themes emerging when we speak to our international staff. And it's really important that we sort of try and look at and address those key themes. Sometimes that's frustrating because we know that we can't influence or change everything. So for us, I think the biggest issue is accommodation. We can offer a single room accommodation for our international recruits. Again, that's a challenge because they're in short supply. It's quite hard to find. And we can only offer that really for the short term. And then we have a massive problem trying to support our staff moving on to, more longer term family rentals. And, that's because, those family homes aren't necessarily available. They're very expensive. And with the rise of cost of living, we do have to let our international nurses know, how to work out the approximate cost of bills and to take that into account as well. Initially when they come on their own and they'll want to bring their families over later once they've found larger accommodation, obviously until their spouse arrives here and gets a job, they are trying to manage their family on their single income at the moment. To be honest, they're restricted on where they can rent as well, because initially they won't have a car, so they don't have that freedom of being able to drive around. So where they can go and rent is restricted really around, where they're working and within the local bus routes. And that's okay, but quite often we find that the bus timetables don't align with the start and end of their shift times. Despite these frustrations, it's a massively rewarding role. Getting to know the staff before they arrive, meeting them when they're here. We know that everyone will face these challenges, and we're always here to support them through that, and hopefully see them flourish.
So I've also got
Tim
here
yes.
from Dorset Healthcare to actually just talk to us a little bit about what they're doing there sort of in person. So just over to you, Tim.
So Tim is the head of recruitment and resourcing at
DHC, aren't you? So Tim, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Maria, as part of my team, has been very open and honest about the challenges as well as the opportunities. And it was just moreover, I'm here to answer any questions that the board may have. It is, as Maria said, an incredibly rewarding role that she does, but it is quite challenging alongside everything else. So if there's any questions from the board, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thanks, Tim. And I think the issues, so thank you first of all for sharing that video. I found it really informative actually, and quite insightful into some of the issues. I think what we heard there on the video will be played out across every single organisation here that has lots of international labour. So please, let's not just restrict the Q&A to health organisations. I'm sure it's as relevant to local government and others.
Yeah.
Dawn.
Yes, thank you very much for the story, and as you say, it's incredibly relevant. Leading an NHS provider organisation, and I think for me one of the key issues that we have in Dorset is around our accommodation, and the lack of that we have for not just international recruits, but for anybody that's moving to the area. And I know I've spoken to colleagues in the local authorities about actually what can we do to try and support people that want to move, to make sure that there is affordable accommodation for them for the future. I think that's absolutely fundamental to continuing to attract.
So you say you've spoken to colleagues, but
and Graham about this, and I think Matt, we're coming to have a round table, aren't we, to talk about housing and how we're going to take that forward. It's a huge issue.
Thank you. Yeah, Patricia.
So I probably going to burst everyone's bubble now, I'm afraid, because I think that what we've got is a reflection of the transactional issues that exist with overseas recruitment and not the real issues. And that's because people are reluctant to talk about the real issues, which is how they fit culturally. And I'm honest, I have a bit of an issue with overseas recruitment, and I hate the word recruitment as well, because it's not a word chosen by them, it's just a word chosen that makes it comfortable for everyone else to describe. Because we bring people over from overseas and we don't develop them and we fit them into the bits that the service needs covered, and rather than seeing them as part of the whole workforce, and that is a genuine issue. Yes, there are issues with accommodation, but the bigger issue is how we support people to fit in culturally, and not by adapting themselves, but by us adapting to their needs. And it's really difficult for someone who has never moved from the other side of the world for a job without their family with them to understand what it feels like for them when they come along and they've never been away from home. They quite often don't recognise some of the poor treatment they get, because a lot of our staff come from Dubai, where the treatment is even worse. So here is just better than what they've had before, rather than recognising that we quite often don't treat them like human beings. And I think the other issues are that we don't recognise the experience that people have when they arrive, because we are constantly comparing overseas training to UK training, when the reality is if they've come from a country that was previously part of the empire, their training regimes are based on UK principles. So bringing people over who have had 8-10 years experience at ITU and sticking them in a band 5 role where they think they're going to stay forever is not realistic. And we don't expedite their development or their movement up the career ladder. And we also don't use the expertise they have working in different countries to inform us about how the NHS might function differently. So we've got to think a lot more about some of those issues around how we get the best out of them, how we help them settle in the UK culturally, how we make them feel welcome and valued, and how we use some of the expertise they've got to challenge us around the way that the NHS works.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm going to come back to you in a minute around how we actually put some of that into effect. But Siobhan.
Yes, it was a great video, and it's you watch that and you sort of think, and these people stay because actually the hurdles that are described are really big, aren't they? And I think all of us want to make Dorset sort of the best place to be working in the public sector, actually, not just in health. But through Black History Month, we did quite a number of sort of webinars and listening to staff. And actually, some of our overseas staff, their lived experience is really difficult. And this leads to quite difficult conversations about race, about, you know, our aspiration to be anti-racist in UHD. And they are uncomfortable conversations, but actually, we've started some of those conversations because Patricia is absolutely right. There's a much bigger cultural issue here about how we are treating people, and also it's led us to really think about
race equality strategy and how are we doing that, and how are we listening to people's experiences. And then I really hope the ICB and Dorset as a whole, we can really look at some of the really practical issues which were highlighted in the video, because housing is a key one. Go on.
Thanks, Jenny. I find it quite difficult to watch that video, and I've had some more in-depth conversations with some of the people in the video, and none of it sits comfortably. And while there are opportunities across Dorset for us to work together and be better on experience for our international overseas recruits, there's something about alternatives to this and thinking about how much we spend on international recruitment and what's the opportunity to look at what it costs to do something around the population of Dorset and widening participation and better terms and conditions for entry through social care, and really thinking differently about how we make that investment in conjunction with overseas recruitment being part of our answer. But I don't think it should be all of our answer.
Yeah, so we know that the NHS in particular has, in its formation, relied on overseas workers. So from the start of the NHS, that's how the NHS was formed. And we know that for the vast majority of those people, that they struggled to get beyond basic grades because of the, and I'm going to say it, the racism that existed. So nurses, in particular, doctors coming over from the Caribbean, from Africa and from India. And really interesting, when I worked in NHS England, when I joined it in September 2020, I was chatting to a Filipino nurse, only then to do some work to find out that the Filipino nurses were the third largest cohort of nurses that the NHS has. 33,000 Filipino nurses, and only 20 of them were in bands 8 to 9, which is senior grade. So nobody beyond band 9, which would be the very senior managers. And only one of those out of the 20 was a band 9. So the rest were below that. So I decided to meet up with all 20. And the thing that they talked about was the fact that they came over as band 5s, because that's the only way that you can come into the NHS as a nurse at a band 5 level. And many of their colleagues had been working in the NHS for 25 and 30 years and were still at band 5s. So, and these were people that came over with experience. So it's not they came over as new nurses, they came over with experience. So we actually set up a programme to progress some nurses. And I'm pleased to say that there has been some progression against Filipino nurses. But the reason I wanted to mention that is because there are some real fundamental issues, I think, that exist, certainly within the NHS. I don't know, it might be different for care and local government. But I think unless we tackle this issue about racism, as Siobhan said, and think about which side of history we want to be on, then we're always going to replicate those problems. And what was interesting for me about that video is that I've worked abroad, and when I was heading out abroad, there was a whole package that was put around me, not formal stuff, but give me introductions to organisations that could tell me about housing, could tell me how to negotiate housing, could tell me about transport, that could tell me about childcare, all of the things that I needed to know that would enable me to go out ahead of starting my job and actually try and put some of those things in places. So I think there are some practical little things that we could do to try and make this a bit easier. But I also wanted to pick up on Patricia and Dawn's point about the reliance on overseas staffing, because I do fundamentally have a moral kind of aversion to it, because I think pre-COVID there was always an issue in the sense that we were bringing people over and not giving them a good experience. But now that COVID has been around, we know that those countries are really relying on their professional resources, but we still in the NHS are reliant on bringing people over without any thought to what does this mean about decimating other countries. So one of the things that Patricia and I talked about a couple of months ago was that, bearing in mind that all of us are looking to international recruitment, can we actually develop a model in Dorset that enables us to give back to those countries, so we're not just taking, and we can give back in various different ways, but that's one of the things that we're looking at. Cecilia.
Just to add to that, that was what was going through my mind, is the opportunity for British nurses to see how healthcare works in other countries. I mean, in business, that's what you would do. You would have those sort of opportunities to share, because, frankly, you know, as was said, a lot of those individuals came over because they know of the NHS, they were trained in NHS, and they had to learn how we do things. Hang on a minute, we could have had the opportunity to learn how they do stuff, and that gives you the benefit, the win-win for everybody, because it gives British nurses, doctors, allied health professionals opportunities to go and see how it is done elsewhere, and then do a swap.
Okay. So I'm going to bring Kay in.
Yeah, I agree with what you were saying there, Jenny. It did strike me though that we probably got all of our providers doing their own thing a bit here, and it would be sensible for them to get together, provide an integrated package for Dorset, and also perhaps allow the staff to mix across Dorset. I know myself from being a head teacher how important it was for NQTs, especially I had quite a number from European countries on my staff, and they really benefited a lot from meeting others in a similar situation elsewhere, and that kind of development and training that allowed them to talk to others in a similar situation and have a specialist group that supported them and understood the issues, rather than disparate policies or procedures across Dorset. I thought that might be quite useful in some ways, while we still have, because if we are recruiting and we are accepting people and they are already here, we have an absolute duty to make sure that we support them well, and you want some really good unified support across Dorset, rather than it depending on somebody who's quite good in one area who does it quite well, and in other areas there may not be someone like that.
Sam?
I guess the main thought for me is, and so what do we do with all this?
And it's a patient story that we should reflect on, and they don't always need to go further. But we've naturally had a conversation about some of the opportunities, largely about some of the issues that we need to tackle. They're going to require investment. So I've got in mind the ICB, the ICS transformation strategy. And the bit for me that's missing is, so what's the scale of the issue and how much of this is a solution? Because that enables us to work out how much we can invest in it and what the benefits might be. And I'm not just talking financial benefits, I'm talking about how to give back to other countries and how do we create a life for someone. And so for me, these are things that we need to pull into the strategy development, because that'll underpin investment and benefits and how we measure them. Because if we get this right, it's properly transformational and quite unique, I'd say. But and so my kind of reflection back is, really great story, got a lot of stuff right, got some stuff to improve, but what do we do with it as an ICB? And that's the bit I'm interested in.
Thank you. And then Rob.
So actually, follows on from that, Dan, it was maybe not articulated in such a strategic way, but I was interested to know, so we know we have a real problem in recruiting care workers as well, and having a gold-plated NHS offer, fantastic, aren't we lucky, potentially, but we shouldn't be doing. I mean, Dawn, we've talked about it as well. It's what's the offer in Dorset, a public sector offer, rotations and things, and that has to be our strategy moving forward. Because I know the ICB has NHS badged above it, but we're all around this table, aren't we? So it's that much wider conversation of how do you make Dorset that brilliant place that people want to come and work.
Matt, and then Dawn.
Yeah, thank you. So from a local authority perspective, we suffer with the same issues in terms of we have been concluding some overseas recruitment, been really successful, felt some of the barriers that you've also experienced. But I think that's one of the strengths of the ICB, is that actually we need to bring all of those things to the table. And as from local government, I'm sure on Graham's well, BCP as well will be happy to be part of the conversation around the issues around housing in particular. But that's not just an issue for our overseas colleagues, that's an issue for our whole workforce. Yeah. It's a bigger conversation than that, but if we can bring our collective wisdom of the room to try and solve that and make Dorset the best place to work in public sector, that would be really, really powerful, and be happy to support that conversation. So I think that is some of the action. As Dawn and I literally spoke yesterday about a potential round table on housing. There are real restrictions around what we can and can't do with housing, but let's understand what they are and see if we can find some collective creative solutions to those. And then I did take that piece around how do we support public sector overseas recruitment in terms of when they're arriving. There are some things that we can do as local authorities in terms of providing support and advice around that in the way that we would do for any of your employees. But if we pull it into one central place, then that might be more beneficial.
Yeah. And then I've got Dawn, Drew, then Paul.
Just building on Dan's point about the strategic approach to this, I'm absolutely expecting to see the workforce supply across health and care as part of our people plan for our ICS, and within that workforce supply, really interrogating the opportunities with both overseas recruitment and thinking differently about our own local recruitment, and then that will feed into how we then decide what our priorities are and where we put our money to support that.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thank you. I very much agree with the conversation and certainly agree with what Matt said. Two main parts of it for me. There's obviously the accommodation piece. I think what is easier for us is capital. So we've got some really large regeneration projects we're doing, and an ability to do more on that. So we can be an active partner, in workforce and housing. And we should look to do that, and I know we talked about it a little bit, but we should really have a work stream that looks into that in more detail. And then the integrated package piece, well, that is absolutely not beyond the wit of this table to organise in a way that is really transformational, and we can do that and we should do it. So in terms of round table around either side of that discussion, we actively wouldn't, you know, to be desperate, not just would like to be involved in that conversation. I think collectively we can do a huge amount to move that forward. And I do also take the point that it's not the only solution. You know, with workforce is a, you know, but we might as well do the international recruitment right. And then the last point, I guess, across both of them for me is its scale. You know, we shouldn't just, oh, here's another 10 houses we can do. You know, how can we get, you know, 1,000 extra houses? How can we get, you know, I don't know, 2,000, 5,000 extra people done properly? You know, whatever it is, we should look to have some scale about it. Otherwise, it's not transformational. We're not moving the needle. And there's massive opportunity in that if we do it right. It's a huge benefit for us, not just culturally, but financially. Point of difference.
Thanks, Drew. Paul.
So I was trying to think why this happens, because I don't think there are going to be many people in organisations who want the sort of narrative and rhetoric that we're hearing and out, you know, intentionally. But I think we probably get as organisations to a point where we've got such a workforce crisis that it's affecting our ability to deliver our services, that all these apparent easy answers appear in front of us, and we go for them because actually that we see this need in front of us, and I think so is an answer. We need to do something that avoids the sort of a tendency, and it's a human nature to have a knee-jerk. We've got to fill a gap. And that's where I think that challenge, what do we do collectively across Dorset, is rather than just acknowledging the rhetoric, but actually something that says, well, what can we put proactively in place that is a bit of a check and challenge when we search for solutions around our workforce gaps, to make sure that we are looking in the right places, taking the right offers, and then making sure that we are doing what is necessary to make sure those staff are respected and well looked after, and all the things that people have highlighted. And I think if we collectively own that and sign up to something like that, it'll take a bit of work altogether. Then there's a safeguard for us to stop us continuing, you know, in some of those, you know, the crisis-driven approaches that understandably we find ourselves in, and we've got to act there and then because of the crisis that we find ourselves in.
It sounds like you're talking about a workforce strategy, which I think is one of the things that Dawn's got on her list to do. So I'm going to take Dan and then go back to Patricia to sum up. Yeah, I thought you put your hand up again. Yeah.
I just wanted to go to the other end. So a point about so what do we do? Strategy. The other bit is we also don't want to wait for that. And so I'm going to make a point ignoring the financial position. You're done with £50,000, £100,000. Now, we've talked a lot about reputational risk we're currently wearing, the experience of those individuals, their families. And so, notwithstanding the financial position, are there levers we ought to explore now that could give those people better experience? I think you, Jenny, made the point about expedited L&D programmes, etc., etc. Because I don't want us to just keep waiting for this nirvana of strategy and transformation, and actually, quite in the scale of things, quite a small pot of money can go a long way. And I don't, after making quite a strategic point, there's also quite a transactional point about what can we get on with now. And I just wanted to throw that into the mix because there's a don't let the best be the enemy of the good type of point to this.
Yeah. I mean, I think there were some practical things that came out from the various contributions, weren't there? Like pulling together the various resources that we have in one place so that every organisation can use that to bring people over. And the round table, I think Matt spoke about the round table, but Patricia, shall I hand back to you to...
Yeah. So I think there's a few things going through my mind. I think the first thing is that in terms of the Siobhan's reference around race equality, we need to make some pace underneath those strategies. But one of the first things we need to start to do is get rid of the rhetoric in our organisations that overseas training is substandard, because that's not true. And that drives a lot of the decisions and attitudes around particularly doctors that come over here that stay in non-career grade jobs because we have this attitude that their training is not as good.
Can I just ask a question on that? Is that something we can do locally, or is that dictated by the centre?
I think it needs work from the centre as well, from the deaneries, because we know that overseas doctors have poorer attainment rates, and that's not because they're not as intelligent, it's simply because of the rhetoric around them and their abilities. when I did my master's degree, I deliberately chose an international programme, and I was the only UK-based student on that master's programme. And that gave me a lot of experience of what other systems in other countries look like. And so I think the benefit of trying to do something reciprocal where nurses and doctors and other professionals not necessarily go and work over there, but even if we could just fund small study tours, enable them to see how healthcare can be delivered in other places that quite frankly is a lot less expensive as well.
And we can learn from others.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good idea. I think there's something about us having a common approach to induction. So if a lot of our staff go and do sabbaticals in places like New Zealand and Australia, and actually for the first couple of days they don't do any clinical work or are inducted because they spend that time with mentors and support in HR that walk them through banking systems, tax systems, make sure they've got accommodation, all that kind of stuff. When they arrive, their badges are already ready, their names are already up on the board with their photographs, so people know that they're coming and they're already starting to see them as part of the team. So there are lots of things we can do around standardising induction that makes a difference. I think there's something about culture. And it isn't just about helping people embed themselves in our organisations, the community. It's also about recognising that they come from different cultural backgrounds. And so if there's been a lot of work done in the UK around the difference between British culture, Asian culture, African and Caribbean culture. And whilst Britain is based on a society of individualism, some of those other societies are based on a culture of collectivism. And as we're starting to move more towards partnership in the NHS, there is a huge amount we can learn from overseas colleagues about how that collectivism operates. And so we need to start to think about understanding some of that stuff, but also enabling them with our need to change in behaviours and the way we work and interact with each other, because they've got a wealth of knowledge and experience to bring to that conversation. And also that understanding of where they sit culturally helps judge good performance, bad performance, talent management, because we get it wrong all the time, and simply because we don't understand their cultural backgrounds. And then the last thing in my mind is, I agree with Dawn that overseas recruitment should not be seen as the beginning and the end of our sorting out our staffing challenge, because we need to have a mixture of staff from all different backgrounds that reflects the communities that we serve, but also the staff mix within our organisations. But one of the ways that we could deal with our medical staffing shortage more quickly is if we considered as a system whether we want to set ourselves up as a CSER academy. That means forming formal relationships with countries overseas, bringing international doctors over here who are already working at consultant level overseas, expediting them through the Article 14 process to qualify as consultants or GPs, and then we're not in the process of waiting 8 years for somebody to qualify because the training places have increased. That will give us a really good reputation internationally as a system that is forward-thinking and supports people to work across country boundaries to develop their careers professionally, and it would help us solve some of our medical workforce issues, which are really acute. So I think we just need to think about some of those things and consider them, whether we think those are things that we might want to do, and then we can start to develop plans to make it a reality.
So Patricia, we're going to leave you and Dawn to work with all of the partners around the table on that. Could you come back to us with a kind of programme of action which includes some of the immediate things that we can be doing, particularly as we're heading into the winter, because we know that that's going to be a period of additional strain, and then the longer term stuff as well. And when do you think it's best to kind of bring?
I'll leave that to you. What do you think? Because I know you started some work already.
Yeah, I think that there is there's something for the board to be sized on almost immediately, because there is a lot of it. I do think it's important that people recognise that individual providers and our social care colleagues will be doing a lot of work in this space already, and I think there is a way for the board to be sized on that quite quickly.
So maybe to the next meeting if you bring something back.
The longer term stuff will be part of the people plan ready for March next year.
Great. Thanks very much. Okay, so I'm going to move us on to your report, Patricia.
So I will take the report as read. Oh, just bear with me 1 sec. The things I particularly want to just bring everyone's attention to are obviously since the report was written, we've now got a new Prime Minister and a new Secretary of State.
It was a bit out of date, your report, wasn't it?
Steve Barclay. What I've just said might be out of date in a week, so you never know. So we've now got Steve Barclay. So, the challenge for NHS England is forming a relationship with him, given that previously he was only in post for 6 weeks, so that wasn't really possible. I think the one positive is the 3 health ministers that have been appointed to work underneath him are known to us, known to the service, have experience of health and social care, so we've got at least some continuity. The COVID inquiry has begun. We'll wait and see just how much public sector organisations across the board are asked to provide evidence. I think we're still unclear about how long that inquiry will last and whether it will be a short 18-month inquiry or whether it will last longer and take a much deeper look into COVID. And I think some of that will depend on the initial evidence that they start to look at. The National Audit Report, I think it would be really helpful if you were to read that. It gives, I think, a realistic overview of the expectations of ICSs as they're set forward with the work programme from July and in the midst of operational pressures going through winter. And you'll see in the report that as health partners, we met and took a decision about some short-term priorities just to take us until the end of March, whilst in the background we're still doing the work with Sam's team and other partners on developing the ICP strategy, because if we don't start to get some clearer focus on a small number of priorities, we're going to find it really difficult to get through winter. And so we have given our teams permission to deprioritise a lot of other work with the preference of focusing on the 3 priorities that we have identified. NHS England, after a wide consultation, have produced the operating framework that will apply to them and how they work with regions and integrated care systems. I think it's really unfortunate in that framework that it doesn't refer to integrated care systems very often and instead refers a lot to integrated care boards, and I think they've missed a trick there, and we need to be able to compensate for that and work in a way across the partnership that is effective to us. I also think they've confused provider collaboratives with the individual responsibilities of providers under the provider licence, and again I think that's unfortunate in terms of the language, but we need to work through that and what it means. At a regional level, the region have already started a series of workshops with ICB chief executives to work through how we want to, as a region, interpret the operating framework with in the context of very much a hands-off approach by the region, only having formal intervention when it's absolutely necessary, and a grown-up and adult relationship, which I think will be really positive going forward. The ICP strategy is now in draft. Sam's team, I think, have done a really good job on that, and they have really taken the accessibility standard really seriously in asking the production team to write it in language that a 9-year-old can understand, so that all of our community, whatever level of educational attainment, are going to be able to relate to that strategy. The insights from our community are really powerful, actually, and it built confidence for me that what came out of those community interviews was nothing that we wouldn't expect, which means we are very much connected to the needs of our community, and most of the insights refer to the desire to move to what Cormac Russell would call connected communities, which are building on their strengths. A really powerful message, though, for the NHS is that people do not want to be referred to as patients. They see that as disabling for them. They want to be referred to as people. They want their holistic
needs being taken into account and not being seen as the condition that they present with. So that poses a challenge for many of our clinical body in terms of language, but we need to hear that and we need to act on it. And then finally, we as an exec team, we've had a couple of meetings with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we'll probably bring something to board or subcommittees in the next few weeks, just to talk to them about how they can help us with the development of place, because it's one of the things that is moving very slowly, and it will be one of the key delivery arms of the strategy, because I think we need to work on the basis of things need to be delivered at place unless there's a really good reason why not. And PwC, having worked in developing the integrated model in Valencia, have a lot of experience of operating at place level and have been doing some work to support all the systems. So I think what we're going to do is talk to local government colleagues and whether we could just bring them in for a few months just to help us get place really mobilised properly so it's ready to start as a delivery engine in April. What we've got at the moment is the cross-county steering group, but we have not been able to mobilise the place-based leadership teams, even to get interim place leaders in while we're working through formalising that structure. And I think PwC will be able to help us with some of their capacity to get that up and running over the winter period, which will be really positive. And then you'll note from the paper that everyone is struggling at the moment as we hit winter early, right across health, local government, third sector, everyone is under extreme pressure. So it's really important that now we've made the decision on some of the out-of-hospital models that we are able to mobilise those as quickly as possible, because otherwise when we get into the heat of winter in January, it's going to be very, very difficult. I'm happy to take any questions. You'll see there are updates from each partner. I'm sorry this is not coming into 6 pages and I'm breaking the rules already, but having representing everyone, it's proving very, very difficult. And one of my thoughts actually was maybe we need to have a primary care update, Ben, within the paper that's a bit broader, and we'll need to think about that going forward.
So it's going to get longer.
It's going to get longer, sorry.
Okay, any questions or comments for Patricia? Just a couple of things from me then.
Drew.
Oh, sorry, Drew, and John as well.
Just to absolutely endorse the place-based one, comment, and I just think that that's so at the crux of this, isn't it? And there's different understandings of what that means, and the sooner we can really all lean in and do that genuine work on that and set that up, I think would be really, really beneficial. So if there's anything that is not happening from a local authority perspective that's stopping that, we desperately need to have that conversation as soon as possible. And yeah, fine. I'll talk a little bit about our pivot towards enabling work and stroke space of the Cormac Russell, nurture development stuff that we've been doing with them as well. So I just think there is a real time now. Now is a really interesting time. There's a bit around that, obviously necessity breeds invention, but there is also, as a better way of delivering service and a more sustainable way of delivering service as well.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. I thought it was a really clear report. Albeit that the government was changing. I thought the way in which you've written and brought to life the key issues was really, really clear. I think the
That's Natalie, John, so you can thank Natalie.
Well, Natalie, Patricia, both, and all of the teams. I actually really just wanted to acknowledge the operational pressure that you refer to. Now running for a quarter, I think, since you declared operational level 4. I really note that the teams are working full tilt at the moment, and it's going to be a sustained level of intensity, I guess. Is there any more that we need to be thinking about as an ICB, Patricia? Just because, sustaining this level of impact is super hard, of course. I think it's on everybody's minds. You just didn't mention it in your intro, so maybe anything you want to say on the operational level at the minute and how you are supporting and caring for the staff through that. I'll come back on another point in a minute.
I'm honestly, John, the key to
the work that's going on out of hospital that needs to step up a gear, which is preventing unnecessary admissions and getting people discharged much more quickly. That's the key to us achieving good flow. It's the key to us delivering on the elective care standards. It's the key to taking the pressure off staff right across health and social care. So if we've started a few schemes, we're 2 weeks in. Once we get further into that and we've given them time to work, if they're not delivering, then we need to review and go back to the drawing board. But that's the key to all of this.
Okay, John, you said you had another question?
Well, just one other thing for me to catch up on 5.4.1 on the. I know we're advertising for a chief exec, and then subsequently we'll get to a joint chair. It would be just useful for. I don't think at the ICB we've formally seen the background to this decision, and it would be great just to have a summary of the initial proposals that led to the creation of the joint chief exec and the joint chair role, just so we've got it for people who are new. I'm not cited on the detail of that since July, so it'd be useful just to see the summary of the model, how decision making would work, and what are some of these integration benefits.
Yeah, and I think I'll respond to that really quickly, because Dawn, in her interim chief exec role, has actually been really good at communicating to us the next steps, and I may have assumed wrongly that that information was getting to you as NEDs as well, so I can get all of that information forwarded. It's going to be quite a bit to read, I'm afraid, but perhaps if we can have a summary as well that the NEDs can have, that will be really helpful. So apologies on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn.
And then I've got Kay and then Siobhan.
Mine's very quick. I just wanted to say how much I welcomed the development of the Safeguarding Families Together in 6.2.2, knowing that, you know, from my background in education, my ex-colleagues have been pushing for this for some time, and they'll be very pleased to see that. And I think from a safeguarding point of view and from a children and young people's point of view, it makes absolute sense to try and integrate this much better.
Thank you. Siobhan?
I'm still a bit croaky after having had COVID. But so what I'd say, the pressures, I just want to make a comment really, because I think the pressures are across the system everywhere. And interestingly, Ben, we were on a call with GPs yesterday, and the pressure is everywhere. And the way I think, you know, from an acute trust perspective with both DCH and UHD, our priorities are very much on patient safety and looking after our staff. And I can see Nick nodding there. I think we're really, really focused on that. And I suppose I just want to flag two risks there. One, I am worried about the financial position. And if you look at risk appetites, our risk appetites in hospitals are very much about putting patient safety first. And we just need to say that, really. And the second point might have just gone out of my head, but it was, it's gone. But, you know, I suppose some of our messages are about really how we look after our staff and focus on patient safety at this time.
Siobhan, if it comes back, then let me know. But I've got some. Sorry, Nick. Oh, sorry. Apologies, Nick. I didn't see you.
That's okay. Maybe just complimenting what Siobhan was going to say, and this might be what popped out of my head, but for me there's something about as we go into winter, getting real visibility on all the capacity that we've got across the system, and secondly really making sure that we've got a dynamic system. I've had COVID too, that's my excuse. We've got a dynamic system risk assessment as well, so we understand actually where risk is sitting across the whole of the system, not just within the acutes, because that's ultimately where most patients end up, and where a lot of the risk sits. But actually there's often lower risk places for patients to be if we've got that visibility. So I think that's something that's going to be really important, and really important for the ICB to lead on getting put in place across the whole of the system going into winter. I don't know if that was what you were thinking, Siobhan, but I took the opportunity.
Siobhan wants to come back, so it's absolutely complimentary. I suppose a bit that was just.
I was really pleased to hear Patricia say it about prioritising, because I think we are all concerned about the bandwidth and the ability of people to really get involved in everything that we want to do as an ICB. So actually we have to be very clear on what our priorities are this winter, and actually challenge ourselves not to be trying to engage too many people in too many things, because people really don't have the bandwidth at the moment.
And I guess that was one of the things I wanted to pick up from your report, Patricia, around how do we as a board really get to understand the where the grit is at the moment, where the pressures are, to make sure that we are looking at the right things and lending our support where we need to. And I'm not sure how we do that, but if all of you as partners across the various executive across the various partners could think about that, because we should be here to add value, and I'm not sure, just looking at papers and doing stuff is not necessarily picking up on the issues that are going on at the moment. The second thing I wanted to do was just to really congratulate UHD for the outpatient assessment clinic, the 3 awards that you're up for. So well done with that.
And they're system awards, actually, because I think that whole project was really, with ICS colleagues, a real testament to Dorset, actually. Thank you.
And then the last thing was really just to compliment all of the additions that were in the report from the VCS sector and local government. And with local government in particular, the fact that it didn't just focus on adult social care, because I think that would be the bit that's easy to do, but actually brought in some of the wider issues, such as the cost of living, which started to give us a flavour of some of the issues that we're facing at the moment, and children's services. So I just wanted to commend that, and we look forward to seeing more of that as we move forward.
I've just got a couple of comments then.
Okay, do you want to make them now then?
So
I'm going to move us on.
I think there's a couple of things that we do need to focus on. One that Nick and Siobhan have mentioned, which is we need to understand where all of our capacity is right across the system, even if it's been mothballed, even if it's not open because it can't be staffed, because we might choose to move some of our flexible staff into different places to use the right capacity in the right place. So next time the meetings are had with David and Dean, I really need that information to come forward so we can make sure we're staffing the right areas to have the right impact. The second thing is, and this is more difficult, we need as health and care organisations to agree a dynamic risk assessment so we know that we are putting our focus and effort investment in the right place. That's really difficult because we all have a slightly different view of the risk that we're carrying, but it's much easier to have a conversation with the CQC when we've made a decision that we all stand by if it's based on a dynamic risk assessment that we've all agreed. So can I really ask partners to come together with Debbie and her team to really work through what that dynamic risk assessment would look like, and that then is the way that we make decisions going through winter about where the emphasis needs to be. There are going to be a couple of things coming out from NHS England over the next couple of weeks. One, an opportunity for systems to apply to have their provider collaborative as a pilot in order to get some support through NHS England around mobilising provider collaborative more quickly and moving it to adding value to systems. I think we need to think about, my personal view is right now we haven't got the bandwidth for that. The second one is to pilot the National Care Leavers Covenant, which I think would be a really positive thing for us to do actually, because we know that because of the history of the way our old local authorities have behaved, we have huge amounts of young people in care that will be coming out of care, and we need to find a way of supporting them socially, psychologically, economically. We will be able to contribute hugely to some of that with our local government partners if we sign up to that covenant and put ourselves forward to be a pilot site. So I just want us to really consider that. And then the final point is just to help you understand that there might be lots of expectations around the ICB and what it might have done in the first 100 days and all that carry on. The reality is that as an ICB executive team, while there's things to build on that are positive about the organisation, there is also a huge amount to change that has not been effective in the past. So we are giving our capacity and support where we can, but we have a hell of a lot of work to do to turn the ship in a different direction to where it needs to be, and that is going to take us about 18 months. And that is why we've taken a decision which wouldn't have happened in the past to agree 3 priorities through winter, because we haven't got the bandwidth to focus on the breadth of work that was happening before. We need new structures, we need teams to be developed, we need to change the organisational culture, we need to work on the governance and decision making framework. There is a lot of work to do. So we will support where we can, and we've made adjustments to the structures to put more people out in the field to support with winter and the transformation going forward. But it's just for everybody just to be mindful that that is where we are.
So a lot of that, Patricia, will be what's required to set up a new organisation anyway. So I think you'll have the support of the board with that. The National Care Leavers Covenant, it sounds really great, and I wouldn't say we don't sign it, but I have a lot of experience around the Armed Forces Covenant, which doesn't mean much other than what's written on paper. So I think if we are going to invest time in it, let's make sure that it is actually going to do something.
Yeah, and that covenant is more about how do you support carers into the workforce, and given that we've got workforce gaps, it could be a real winner for us and an opportunity for us to support them as well, but we need to work through what infrastructure that would need.
Or see them as an extension to the workforce. Yeah. Dawn, did you still want to come back?
I was just going to come back on just a slightly earlier point and just to remind people, as the partner member for mental health, we need to also remember about the other groups of patients that where we've got significant pressures. So that's in our sort of adult treatment units, but also some of our specialist units around eating disorders, around children's mental health as well, and around placing children with really complex needs. And there are real shortages in all those areas too. So it was just that we didn't lose that in the discussions.
And we're hearing these things almost on a daily basis nationally, aren't we? So it's really important point to make. Just one last thing, Patricia, on the dynamic risk assessment, is that going to make use of live data? Because it's quite difficult to have dynamic risk if we're working on retrospective data.
Could we also clarify what we mean by dynamic risk assessment? I think it can mean different things to different people, so that was...
Do you want to do that now?
Were you going to speak then?
No, I was going to nominate someone. Just because Dean and I spoke about this very thing yesterday, and it's something that Dean, your team are currently trying to pull together, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sorry to land you in it.
Thank you, Paul. For me, dynamic risk assessment means that you make a risk assessment based on what's happening and what's changing at the time.
Yeah.
So for us, the numbers of patients in the emergency departments and the number of ambulances that are queuing outside of the different hospital departments is one example of how the risk can change on a very rapid and frequent basis. So as those numbers of ambulances queue, you've got greater risk at the front door of one or more of the hospitals, and therefore what response do we need to give to that to reduce the risk at that front part of the pathway by increasing potentially the risk further down the pathway. So how do we move it to balance the risk? Because I think what we all see at the moment is that with the pressure that we've got, it's like pushing a piece of paper at a wall. It kind of all crumples at the front, and then as you go further down the pathway, the risk gets less. So you end up having a conversation about potentially at a weekend where you've got ambulances queuing at the hospital, but potentially we can't get people out the back end because we can't get, say, one more patient admitted to a care home at the same time, and that is the kind of the risk profile that we've got at the moment.
Okay,
so Deb is linked into that as the clinical risk owner.
Absolutely.
So I think you would have everybody with you because it sounds like the right thing that should be doing. But I'm conscious that's kind of just come in as not as a side issue, but without some of that detail. So again, that might be something that it'll be useful to just give us a better oversight on, because clearly it's got to be based on live data, and I don't know if we've got live data in all parts of the system to enable that to be effective. So, but anyway, I'm going to curtail the discussion. We are way over time now. There's quite a few hands going up. Save it for when that comes back to us. And I'm going to move us on to Liz. Are you going to take us through the committee terms of reference?
Can do.
Yes.
Just to say that we've gone through
period of the committees reviewing their terms of reference, and we've also added into those terms of reference just some minor amendments to bring, so we've got a consistent approach across all of those tours. And the work plans, I know that they've been discussed at the committees. There have been meetings with the chairs, committee chairs, the chief leads and the CEO around those to bring those all into line. There's been some great work done by my team, but mostly by Steph, to bring those into a consistent format. These are obviously now working documents, and we appreciate it will be iterative approach. We'll be looking to review all of them again at the end of the financial year, and there will be a full governance review Q1-2, we think, mandated by NHS England, so we'll do a further review then. Or take the amendments as read, they've all been approved, just for you to approve and we'll use as working documents from now for the rest of the financial year.
Yeah, so they haven't just been discussed at committees, but they've also been approved there, haven't they?
They
at the
have,
committees.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Sorry, just to add, the risk and audit is to follow, as is the quality and safety committee as to follow as well.
Okay, so Dawn and then Debbie.
Mine was just a very minor point. On the Clinical Commissioning Committee under Section 4, you've got written there medical directors and directors of nursing. They're actually chief medical officers and chief nursing officers, just an amendment.
Thank you. Debbie? Liz actually said what I was going to say. It was just
Which
that
was your
obviously
bit.
I've only been in 5 weeks and I'm doing a piece of work around a new sort of quality framework, quality committees, what's going to go where. So I'm reviewing the work plan, so it'll all come back next time. Yeah.
Great. So people happy to approve the terms of reference as amended? All the changes have been tracked. So if you've been through, you've seen them.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And then that takes us on to the quality report then, Debbie, so I'm staying with you.
Yeah, so first of all, just wanted to say that I'll take the report as read. I wasn't preparing plan to go through the report on a line-by-line basis by any stretch of the imagination. I wanted to just let the board know that that we're changing the style of the quality report, and I'm doing a piece of work on that at the moment. So this is the last time that you will see the quality report as it currently is. We've moved to a bi-monthly quality report in line with our committees to the ICB board that are now on a bi-monthly basis. If there's any escalations that I'll need to make within the month, where we haven't got a report, then they will be verbal escalations. And the style of our report going forward is going to be similar to Patricia's Chief Executive report, where we're actually just escalating what we need to escalate, and also a report that actually gives you the what, the so what and the now what, and not just so to give you an example, in the executive summary of the current quality report, it tells you that, you know, this number of care homes is closing, this number of care homes is closing, we've got this one opening. It doesn't tell us anything. So actually, if we're going to include something around care homes, we need to actually make sure that we've looked at what the safety impact is, worked with our local authorities. So what does that actually mean? You know, is it an issue? Because actually, if we've got other care homes opening, is it an issue or is it not? So I think new reporting will hopefully sort of capture that and be a totally different style. So just some sort of highlights that I wanted to bring to the board from the current quality report. We've already talked. I was going to bring to the table the issue, obviously, that the report highlights around significant ambulance handover delays, but I think we've already discussed that. You know, it is without doubt a patient safety challenge for us, but both Patricia, Dean and colleagues have actually expressed sort of the work that we're trying to do to actually look at the whole pathway and improve flow at sort of all ends of the pathway, which ultimately will help with regards to the significant ambulance delays. So I won't say anything more on that other than the fact that Paul is meeting with support of Katie in UHD to sort of have a discussion with consultant colleagues around the sort of UHD pathway and what might be able to be done. But actually, as I said, it's a whole system, and it's preventative right through to sort of hospital back door. So I think that's already been discussed. In the report, there's an indication that we still have challenges around initial health assessments, and we absolutely do. I think my challenge to my team on this since I've been in post is that actually I want to actually sort of get to the bottom of this and move this forward a bit more at pace. The initial health assessments, both for right across the system, have actually been on our risk register for sort of 6 years, apparently. So clearly we need to move at pace on that. And I spoke to local authority colleagues as well, you know, so that actually let's find out what the issues are and let's try and sort this so that we can actually take it off as a risk, because I don't think it should be there really. I think we should be able to resolve that. The other thing I was going to say was the report, because I don't want it to be all doom and gloom, tells you that the section 117 CQC inspection has taken part for the ICB, and actually the feedback from that was actually really positive, and actually the actions that were required as a result of the inspection were actions that we already had underway. So I think that's really positive. We obviously wait the full report. Dawn's nodding, but actually on the whole it was a positive inspection. So section 117 for partners for colleagues that don't know is obviously the aftercare for our patients that have had mental health episodes. So then just wanted to say that the discharge summaries that is included in the quality report as an issue at UHD has now been really significant improvement, which is great, to the point that actually we are progressing now to closing the contract performance notice, because the improvement is significant and has addressed the issues. So that's another really positive. And then the other area that I just wanted to bring the board's attention to really was in relation to the local maternity and neonatal system. Obviously we've had the publication of East Kent Reading the Signals report that was published on the 19th of October. I think for those of you that might not have read it, it's not an easy read. It's extremely difficult read, and raises significant concerns that have been raised before, I think is probably the best way to address it. So it identifies 4 action recommendation areas around monitoring safety performance, around standards of clinical behaviour, around flawed teamwork and pulling in different directions, particularly around midwifery workforce and obstetric workforce, and general organisational behaviour, looking at sort of being good when actually looking good when actually they're actually doing badly. So it's that whole relationship with the board and what happens. So I just wanted to let you know that obviously that is fairly newly published. The LMNS is reviewing a draft assurance framework that's being developed by NHS England regional team that pulls together the Ockenden 1 and 2 requirements together with East Kent, so that we actually have one reporting framework of quality assurance and delivery against the recommendations, and we're not going to have 3 different action plans with so hopefully that can be all pulled together. And my team are actually looking at that alongside the NHS England colleagues. And NHS England are also looking to develop a consolidated delivery plan for both Ockenden and East Kent, because some of the actions need to be regionally and nationally driven and won't just be on an ICS footprint. And I think as an ICB, we're trying to look to strengthen our leadership across the system for maternity. It's a really key area that's got a lot of focus for obvious reasons, because of both Ockenden and East Kent now being published and demonstrating that there are potential areas of concern that we all need to learn from. So yeah, looking with Patricia and the ICB and the team to actually try and strengthen our ICB sort of leadership for maternity going forward, to support our providers with delivering the transformation that needs to be delivered across maternity services. So wasn't going to say anything else, but happy to open it up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dawn. Kate? Quick off the mark.
I'm glad you said the report was changing, because there were a couple of things that I picked up about the clarity of the report from the point of view of the NED. So, for example, it talks about the aseptic pharmaceutical preparations being an issue, but it doesn't say what the risks are there, how bad the risks are. It talks about amber and red with regard to the independent providers. It doesn't say what they relate to and what the risks are. It talks about concerns in health visiting. It doesn't say what the concern is. All of which left me a bit kind of, what am I supposed to do with this now if I don't know that? And the last one I wanted to I'll just mention is the graphs and charts, and whether we're looking at changing some of those to make the data much more transparent for us. We had a good session when we did the training with NHS providers, which talked about different ways of doing that, and I wondered if there was some thought going into that. But all of those, I was left thinking, what am I supposed to make of this? Because I haven't been given enough information to make anything of it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and that's where I'm coming from really. So it's I think the style of report that we've had is very much each section, as you can see, is written by a different member of the quality team, and then it sort of has become the norm that even if there isn't anything to escalate, actually I need to write something in relation to safeguarding, or I need to write something in relation. So therefore there are just statements put in the report that actually don't mean anything. Health visiting is clearly just around workforce, but actually it doesn't tell you that, and it doesn't tell you the so what bit. So I think absolutely. With regards to the data is literally just what is pulled off on DICE, and we're actually working to try and tweak that still and actually make it more meaningful. I'd be interested to know when I bring the next report to you what you actually. I wasn't actually thinking that you probably even need the data. What you need is a 4 to 6 page, I think, is what's being said, quality report that actually clearly lets you know what the areas of risk and patient safety are, and what we're doing about it. So the detail, as in the data, will actually go to our quality and safety committee, which is the subcommittee of the board, which will actually be doing that more detailed analysis on behalf of the board. And providing the quality assurance to the board. So yeah.
So I think the trick is in the title, that it's about quality, and I think a lot of the things in there are statements, but they don't actually tell us anything about the quality. So I think that would be useful. And to pick up Kay's question about data and performance, we are planning for the next board development that we will actually have Sam come and do that thing for the whole board, so that and that's the direction of travel. So Jonathan, your hand's gone down. Does that mean your question has been answered?
I think so. I mean, Kay articulated it far better than me. I just had a specific question about the aseptic pharmaceutical preparation, because I read it and thought, well, okay, well, what's the problem? You told me it's concern, and then and actually the way Kay articulated it is a much better challenge than me just asking what's the problem. I think it's a problem of the whole report. So no, I don't think I have any more to add.
Thank you, Matt.
And I'll echo that. Okay, you did articulate well. Just welcome the opening comments about making some changes. That my colleagues felt that there was we perhaps couldn't get what we wanted to out of that report. So we'd really welcome the changing format, and if we can contribute to that, we'd be happy to do so as local authorities.
Yeah.
Great. So I think everybody's on board with that. So thank you very much, Debbie. Let's move on then to the performance reports.
Thank you very much. And I suppose in that vein, we've cut down the performance report because it had a huge number of appendices, I think, to previous reports. So any comments on that, and whether we've gone too far in cutting this down? I think I'd want to produce more of a dashboard approach in the future for this, rather than some of the longer text that we've got. What I focused on in the report, really two areas, and Patricia mentioned earlier when we met as a system a few weeks ago, the two performance issues along with finance were the things that we're going to focus on, was the emergency care pathway and elective care. So that's where this report is mainly focused. So I'll start with elective care. What we're supposed to be achieving is no one is waiting over 2 years for treatment.
We're not quite there yet. At the end of October, we've ended with 63 patients waiting 104 weeks for treatment. 42 of those are the orthodontic ones that we know we've got a plan for that will be treated. So we have got a few more, 21 more than we anticipated. A small number of those are due to the pressures that we are experiencing from urgent care at the moment, and ones that weren't treated during the month and have moved over into November. The patients that we have got, they have got plans to be treated. Most of them in November, one or two in December, and one or two in January, and that's in agreement with the patient for that. So we will see those patients stay there for another few months. The plan for orthodontics is that we have got additional capacity come in now. We've got additional 5 patients being treated per month, and they are being treated as we go along. It is an area that we have got a gap in, or difficulty recruiting to additional capacity. So that's where we are with 104 weeks. The next milestone that we need to reach is 78 weeks, so 18 months from initial referral by the end of March. And here we are a bit off plan at the moment. So we are committed, and kind of both organisations, both acute trusts, are planning to get down to 0. There is a considerable number of risk in that, because we have got the winter coming. We are kind of off our plan at the moment, but there's more work going on at the moment to look at that. We have got a what's called a winter elective letter that has come from the centre, with a number of areas that we will be focusing on. Things like kind of just basics of how we manage the waiting list, checking that people are treated in order, that we've got the waiting list being validated. Focus on some of the pathways, particularly on lower GI skin and prostate, which are the high volume ones. Making sure that our outpatient systems are kind of as good as they can be, improving theatre productivity. So that's a piece of work that is going on at the moment, covering all of those areas. On the emergency care pathway, we believe this is where the kind of focusing on this will unlock lots of other things. So at the moment we have got a quarter of our beds with patients who could be somewhere else if we could just find the capacity to move them to. The two things that are being monitored nationally and with kind of great vigour is the mean time for a Category 2 response. So this is the majority, 60% of all ambulance activity is in Category 2. It should be at 18 minutes. In Dorset, we are kind of usually around about 30 minutes per day for that. Across the southwest, it is significantly more than that, because there are places that are more rural than us, and places like Cornwall are experiencing greater times than that, kind of 90 minutes plus as a mean time for it, not just the longest time. And the other one is the handover delays, which is picked up in the quality report as well, where we're seeing anywhere between 100 and 150 hours lost per day of ambulances being waiting for handover. Again, there's been a winter letter, and on Tuesday I was in London for the launch of what's going to be a winter improvement collaborative. So by the end of this week there's a number of things that they are proposing. Now, I think for me that event is focusing on the hospital part of it, not on the discharge part of it. So I'm worried that there's a national focus on thinking that the answer to our winter problems is by looking what's going on in hospitals. I'm sceptical that is the answer, and I believe the focus that we've got on the discharge element of the pathway, making sure that we've got the right capacity in the community, is the way that we will have the best winter that we can have. So I think we need to see, we are due to get the outcome of that by tomorrow, so we need to be, I think, cautious how we're doing this. This is being described in the same way that the 100-day challenge was being described, in a 10-week programme between
this Friday, and whenever 10 weeks will be, somewhere just after Christmas, for that. So I think we need to be open-minded but cautious on what comes out of that. The other area probably that I wanted to highlight was cancer. This is an area that we do relatively well. So once we've got a diagnosis, we treat patients who've got cancer about the quickest in the country. Where we have got the challenge is getting to that diagnosis, which we're in the lower third of the country, and that's mainly down to the first outpatient appointment that we need to get. But there's work going on with that, particularly with the lower GI pathway, with the with kind of the fit tests, so the tests that can be done at home as a solution to the lack of capacity in endoscopy. So I think I'll pause there.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And open it up for anybody, any questions?
Any questions or comments? Ben?
So I suppose you won't be surprised to hear when I read through the performance report, there's no mention of performance within primary care. And I do understand the reasons for that, because it's actually quite difficult. We have very little KPIs that are available to report on. But I suppose that's my challenge, really, that given 90% of all healthcare contacts occur in primary care, we've got no mention of that in the performance report. And I suppose the challenge is, how do we develop sort of relevant and appropriate KPIs that actually can reflect what's happening, within the sort of service I represent?
Yeah. It's a fair comment, and I think in the longer report that we have had previously, which does go to the Finance and Performance Committee, I think there was the only indicator we got there was we had a recruitment. Yeah. It wasn't about activity, so I think it's a fair challenge, and I'll work with David on how we can do that.
Yeah, we do receive a report of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, which does go into the activity levels and face-to-face and virtual contacts and things like that. But you're right, there is an underlying issue, which is because we don't demand it, and it wouldn't be helpful necessarily to demand KPIs. We don't track some of the granular details. So maybe if we can work on an approach that would bring some of that information to light on a useful basis for general practice and for ourselves to monitor, to get under the skin of some of the issues, we can certainly attend to that.
Does that also pick up the other end, kind of community and care packages as well, what you look at?
I was just going to, and mental health actually, because I don't think some of what the Centre monitor for mental health is particularly
But good. Do you pick that up in your committee?
That'll be in the clinical commission.
It will be, yeah. Okay.
We need to have a look at the whole dashboard, don't we?
Yeah. Paul?
So I think that the primary care thing is a really interesting one, because what are those discriminatory markers of general practice activity, capacity, demand, and we don't know what they are. And the problem is we don't know what they are is because there's 80 odd different ways that practices function and record encounters and record demand and run their appointment systems. So all the things that have been tried before, like time to second next appointment, or availability on the day, or time to get through on the phone, all of these sort of things are so dependent upon the delivery model for each of the practices. So my challenge back then would be, if we're going to do this, then we need to go through a process of standardisation with primary care so that we can be sure what it is that we're measuring. Yeah. So I think that is a joint commitment between general practice and us as an ICB, if we decide that that's what we want to do. Because if we just try and come up with something our end, it won't give a true reflection, and each practice will have a reason why their markers are different to other people's. So it's got to be a preparedness for both to be able to do that.
KK?
Yeah, I'm still on the same point actually about primary care, because when I read through this, what struck me was that a number of these things then come back to primary care and have an impact on them. So the issues about CAMS and things, that then refers it back into primary care and puts more pressure on them again. And when we're looking at the risks and the impact of these things, I think we do need to take the whole system into account, not just the hospitals because of flow or the mental health issues, but then where do these people go? They go back to the GPs and they go back to primary care, and I think that's something that needs to somewhere be reflected, because I'm not sure that it is being reflected in a sort of holistic way.
Okay, I can see energy levels are dipping, but we are going to go for a break just after this. So I've got Jonathan and then Cecilia, and then we will be on a break. The naughty two at the front here. Jonathan.
The University of Dorset Hospital 78-week wait forecast graph has 2 lines on it. One looks reasonable, the other looks like someone's just drawn a straight line to 0. Which one's which one's actually going to happen?
Anybody know? I don't know which one's going to happen. I think what that reflects is the risk that there is. So in the modelling that's been done on the current rate, the 248 level is what is currently being predicted as the position. What the Trust and we have declared is to get to 0, and what we're doing between now and then will be working out how we close that gap between the two. Siobhan.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a strange graph because it's the 1 to 6. What is the 1 to 6? Is the 6? Is this current? Because it looks to me as if 6 is that month 6?
It's the October to March. Yeah.
It's October. It's the current position.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So I know our year-end position. What we're really aiming is to get to 0, 78 weeks, by the end of March. So when I see that number currently, if that's a current number, that's our prediction, but we're working to improve it. It's a funny graph. It's not particularly helpful.
Yeah, and it doesn't help I think in the cut and pasting, the Excellers.
And what it highlights is there is a risk, obviously a significant risk, and the risk is very live when we're dealing with all the urgent and emergency care pressures at the moment. And that is the interrelationship that we've been talking about.
Okay, Cecilia, then Dawn.
Mine is just a reflection on what you were saying about sort of the idea that the NHS England can manage winter pressures from the centre with a 10-week plan and make it all go away. I think in terms of as someone from the outside, and you hear that and you just think they're bonkers. That's never going to work. Why is it that you think that is we need this long-term, thinking, planned process that goes across the whole system, and it doesn't do us any credit, I think, to be hearing that there is a group that thinks that they can resolve it by even putting additional resources into hospitals. It's just not going to fix the problem, but it makes us look as if we're not actually addressing the real issue, I think.
So it's one of the things. I had 2 things I wanted to come back on, and that was one of them. So my question, Dean, was going to be, if we decide as a system that actually we're going to focus our energies on discharge during the winter improvement collaborative rather than hospitals, what leverage do we have to do that?
I don't think it's an either-or question, because I think we need to look at all parts of the pathway as well. But I think the major impact that we know is on kind of the discharge side of it. But I think there are still things that can be done at other parts of the pathway
that we can focus on.
So I think it's where we put our emphasis and where we put the majority of our energy to. So I think there are still things like same-day emergency care services are things, and these were one of the things that was discussed on Tuesday, are things that we still need to pay attention to and keep on the burn. And there will be new ideas that we can implement either from the national team or from others. And I don't think we should dismiss those just because it's not going to have the biggest impact. But we need to make sure that the majority of our focus goes on the right part of the pathway. And for us, that is the discharge element.
Jonathan, where you wanted to come back in, I've got Dawn. Your hand's gone down. Was it just a legacy hand?
Legacy hand.
Yeah, thanks. Dawn.
So I was going to make it slightly difficult, but I'll just come back on something that Dean said, because I think the other bit we have to focus on is stopping people getting over the threshold of our hospitals in the first place. Yeah. So there's both. Exactly. We need to do both ends. The point that I was just going to come back to was a slightly different one, and I know you didn't flag it, was just around the COVID vaccination, because that's absolutely fundamental to getting us through this winter. So I checked on the figures this morning, and we've had a significant improvement in the COVID vaccination uptake, because I think that's one of those things that's going to stop people coming into hospital. So we have always got to have prevention in our minds, whatever we're doing.
Okay, so my second question, well, in fact, it wasn't a question, it was to respond to your question, Dean, which was dashboard, yes. I think that's where we need to go. So, yes. Patricia, do you want to ask it?
There's two things for me. There was, I think, again, why NHS England is focusing on hospitals is because NHS sees the world through a really narrow lens, and actually the world doesn't operate like that. So what can we do to influence them to have a different conversation about winter? Because this is about admission avoidance in the back door, and it feels like if we keep focusing on what's happening inside of hospitals, we're just fiddling while Rome's burning. And what we need them to be doing is talking to the government about what they're doing to support out of hospital service. And so what can we do to influence that? I mean, if we're not influencing it through the region, we need to think about a different way of doing it. My second question was, well, because we've also got delays in mental health, and that's just as serious as physical health issues. My second question was, and I know probably everybody's going to go, oh my God, more work, but are we doing harm reviews on people that are staying in hospital who should be elsewhere? Because for some of those, they'll be deteriorating and they'll probably die in hospital, and some unnecessarily. So are we doing harm reviews on that, and where's that information featured so that everyone can see the impact of the way that UEC is working at the moment?
I mean, just to say from a UHD perspective, we've done quite a large piece of work looking at the harm within the cohort of patients who should not be in a hospital bed. So I think we have shared that. I'm looking to some of my colleagues, but if it wasn't shared with you, it was possibly shared with your predecessor, but we definitely have that piece of work from a UHD perspective.
Okay. Matt?
Just to say, I certainly endorse the concept of dashboard. It's been really helpful in terms of transparency, but also that concept of when we see that dashboard performance is showing it's not delivering what we want, the relative action plans associated against it. So mental health has been raised again, and just picking up on the harm issue, there's a reverse element of that. So for those who are not able to access mental health services at the moment, who are left in the community, are actually suffering real harm and are ending up in local authority care, local authorities dealing with stuff because there isn't a capacity to access that, and that's a real concern. So I welcome a focus on that.
Yeah, and it's one of the questions that I was going to put to Debbie, but I decided not to. But focusing on that harm and focusing on the performance data, we should be in a position to identify what might be coming down the track for us next. So Debbie, you talked quite a lot about Ockenden and East Kent, and the question that was going through my mind is what next, because there will be something that comes there. It might be mental health, it might be something else, but I wonder if part of what we do is to focus on the harm and the data. What is it telling us, so that we put prevention in and not wait for it to become the crisis for us to respond to.
Just playing slight devil's advocate there, just taking a step back from this. If the focus on the harm, there's harm. We all know there's harm. You know that more expressly in a detailed sense. Are we absolutely sure every bit of focus has been on what actually can we do about it? In terms of discharge, you focus on harm if we like, but that's not fixing the problem, is it? That's just telling us more detail about the problem we already know is a problem. So
the CQC will expect us to have looked at that and understand the gravity of it.
Yeah.
But you're saying, but we've also got to act.
Step back from this and saying the conversation is, and you're a bunch of health professionals, and you're also saying, well, yeah, there is harm, and let's do some more work on the harm. And I'm saying, okay, great. You're going to have to do some of it anyway, I'm sure. But what are we doing about the problem?
Yeah. Debbie?
Yeah, one of the things that I was talking to colleagues at UHD about, just on this, on the concepts of sort of harm, we know that that UHD particularly has got a high number of medically fit, optimised for discharge patients, and we know that, and we're doing all of this work to actually try and improve our flow and improve our urgent emergency care pathway to actually rectify that we've talked about already in the board. But one of the things that I spoke with Paula and the team about is that's great, but at the moment we still have those patients that are actually in the hospital, and whilst we know that we've got high numbers in the hospital, we know they're deteriorating, they're decompensating, and then we have a challenge then with falls and fracture femur. So we're looking to do a quality improvement programme to support Paula and her team to actually sort of really get into that space, because I think people are right. We do, we have to look at the longer picture, but at the same time we need to keep our patients safe whilst we're in the situation that we're currently in. And so I think we have to do both, don't we? Basically, sadly.
Okay, so go on, Dean.
Particularly from oh dear. Just a quick one. Harm reviews, kind of South West Ambulance Service, when we met them for a board to board, they've had a really good harm review process for patients that have been waiting in the backs of ambulances. So that has been done really well. So I think we ought to kind of comment on that, at least acknowledge that has been done. Question about influence. I think the regional route is probably our major route to do that at the moment. I think there was some pushback kind of at the event with the national team, but I think our greatest impact has to be through to our regional team to do that. I can't think of another way. We're too small a voice, I think, to influence nationally, unless there's a crescendo of kind of complaints that are coming from across the different systems.
Okay, so we're going to take a 10-minute break. Our microphones will go off. People on the screen, you might want to turn your camera and your mics off. And let's resume at 12:05. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hope you've all managed to get some refreshments. And we're going to go through the next part of the open board. So, Rob, I'm going to hand to you for the finance report.
Thanks, Jenny. So I think the first thing to note is that the finance report included in the pack is month 5, which is August. Remembering that's actually only the second month of the ICB. We had the first 3 months as a CCG. We're in November and we're talking about August, which isn't particularly timely. However, when the papers go out and in terms of the reporting, that's the kind of official numbers that we've all had signed off. So as at month 5, because that's what the report details, the ICS is reporting a year-to-date deficit of 14 million against break-even plans. Now when I say ICS, I'm talking about the NHS organisations, so the ICB, DCH, DHC and UHD. That's split roughly equally. It's sort of 6.5 million in the ICB as a deficit against plan, 7.5 million in the providers. That does also include the South West Ambulance Service as well. Within that number they're on break even, and I think Andrew's on the call. They're hoping to be break even as well at the end of the year, so thank you and well done. The 2 acutes are reporting deficits, and Dorset Healthcare are in a slight surplus position at month 5. I think one of the things I just want to highlight is that the report was written a couple of months ago, sort of 2 months in, and I think since then we've, I guess, sharpened the pencil more on what the reasons are behind some of these deficits. So the narrative that's in the report talks about under delivery of CIPs. We were really looking at what was in the plan versus where we are at that particular moment. What's become clear, there's lots of things that weren't in the plan that are happening. So when we come to do the report for the next board, you'll probably see the narrative change, and it's going to start talking much more about the no criteria to reside, those people who are in hospital, who needn't be in hospital, what the cost of that is, because that of course is hugely over what we were expecting, and there's a big cost with that drives the agency cost, etc. We still have more people in hospitals with COVID, especially at the start of the year, than was in the national planning assumptions. So actually it's not just looking at what our planned savings were. There are all these other things that have come along. Drew, you mentioned a couple of boards ago, I think, about what about inflation? You see the inflation coming through. Well, we are as well. We're just sort of covering it off with vacancies and things like that. But we'll be more specific about what are the pressures that we're actually seeing over and above the plan. And we've covered a lot of the other stuff off non-recurrently, sort of so no one-off things we can do, but actually we're running out of those now, so we're seeing the actual impact of all of these other things. So it'll be more explicit, I guess, in what these cost drivers are. There are cost drivers that we know, though. We know that agency is a high number, and that again is kind of reflective of the operational position that we're in, that we've heard about. We also know that within the ICB itself, we're seeing some cost pressures popping up around the personal healthcare or continuing healthcare as well. We've talked about that one before, but that's where the budget overspent a lot last year by about £8 million. So we took that larger amount, the outturn. We applied the sort of 5-6% cost of care exercise to those prices, and we're still seeing again a sort of another £6 to £8 million expected pressure on that budget as well. So that's really the cost of that is a lot, and that's one of the things that I've been talking to the team about. We need to get underneath, because as we move into the planning and what we're going to do about this in the future, there has to be questions around how come we've got so many of these really complex cases coming through now that cost so much money. Actually, is there a way we can stop them getting to that? Because that would save us money in CHC, but actually it might be a different way of commissioning some of the services and things like that. So that's the sort of thing we need to get into, to take the data and use it effectively. The other piece on this one is when you see the reports in the Part 1 boards, we talk about a year-to-date deficit, and then magically we come up with our break-even plan. Mm-hmm. So I think you just need to understand that within the NHS environment, there are rules about when you move off plan. So you have to fulfil certain criteria, etc. like that. It has to be conversations with regions. Where we were with month 5 was that although we were sort of 14 million year-to-date deficit, and if you double that and add a bit, you're sort of £30 million. on the 6th of October, so just about after our last board it was, the chief exec stayed behind, the chief operating officers came over, as did the FDs of the three organisations, and Dean, Patricia and myself sat with them, and we went through what the priorities were about the finance elective and winter coming up. And where we were at month 5, when we looked at all the mitigations, all the back pockets, all that we could do, we thought we could get to actually have our forecast outturn within 10 million of a balanced plan. And again, on a £1.5 billion budget, that feels that you're getting within reach of it then. So we sort of made a commitment that actually for where we were then, we would stick to a balanced plan. That's what we said we'd try and do. We were getting close now to where we think we might get to. So we sort of thought it's time, we hold hands and we still say, actually, we're still going for the balanced plan as the system. Month 6, we need to monitor what happens in month 7 now, because we did see in month 6 that the numbers moved out a bit again. We saw some more pressures on prescribing, which was a national issue. We can't do too much about that. We only found out about it because we were told about it. So we're seeing what happens in month 7, and then we're going to have a reassessment again about, are we still on break even or not? But for the purposes of this board meeting and for the plan for the month 5 results, we were in the position where we're still holding on to that balanced plan. Okay.
Thanks, Rob. So before we go to comments and questions, just to let the board know that we are going to have, as part of our development session, raise the understanding around how the NHS finances work. And we're hoping to also use the same session to look at local government. I know your chief finance officers can't be there, but we're hoping we can still do something. So rather than getting into questions about NHS finance and what we're doing, can you just focus on the report that we have here in the public meeting, if you've got any questions and comments, because the rest we can pick up when we get into that development session. So are there any questions or comments for Rob? And Dan, you've come back at a timely part, because you might want to. We're just on the finance report. There might be something from finance committee that you want to add, but I'll allow you time to get your seat again. Any questions or comments for Rob? God. You don't have to come in. I'm just giving you the opportunity.
It was like a couple of points. I'm conscious that we'll come back to some of this in the closed session when we look at some of the business cases. Finance committee really welcomed it's just an easy report to read than we got a couple of meetings ago, and so to understand where we are. The point that Rob and Jenny took away from finance committee was it's heavily focused on year to date. And what we want to do is see where we're going to land. Some of that gets to the closed session, some of it is for the open session. But it's a really helpful report that shows where we're up to. Clearly there's risks that have been touched on this morning in terms of ICS slippage, SIPS slippage, as well as some other pressures that have come in that are reflected in the report. So I think that's all I draw out from finance and performance.
And you reinforced everything Rob said, so well done.
We didn't.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions or comments, I'm going to move us on then to the quality assurance of mental health and learning disabilities in patient services. Over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. I'm going to do a bit of a double act with Dawn, actually, because it's Dawn's paper and she sat next to me. And
David as well. Is David contributing?
Oh, sorry, yeah, David. Sorry. Yeah, as the board members will know, obviously in September 22, BBC Panorama presented a programme that was raising concerns around care and treatment of patients in a setting within the NHS. And it was a difficult watch for those that haven't seen it. It was really hard to watch. On the back of that, Claire Murdoch, who's our National Director of Mental Health, wrote to CEOs of mental health trusts to ask for assurance around the 4 key action areas that they've pointed out in section 1.3 of the report. So we have subsequently had a response from Dorset Healthcare, and they've written a response to Claire's letter. So I'll hand over to Dawn to do that first-hand rather than me doing it.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think for us as a provider of these services, we only provide the mental health inpatient services. We don't actually provide any learning disability inpatient services in area. We have different levels of assurance that we glean around the services, and we took this letter to actually go and review all of those processes that we have in place, so that we had a really sort of root and branch to see what we've got and how well we think things are working. So in terms of the things that we already do within the organisation, we have quite a few different measures in place that tries to promote the voice of the patient. So for example, we have independent mental health advocates allocated to all of our patients. We work very closely with Dorset Mental Health Forum, which means we have people who've got lived experience who work alongside our clinicians, so they're actually on the wards and in our team seeing what happens. I think the difficulty that we've got is that the issues that we saw in the Panorama programme and also in the dispatches programme is that a lot of these units are locked units, so you don't have that footfall that you would have in some of the other units. So I think it's absolutely essential that, you know, we look at everything that we've got to make sure that we haven't missed anything. We do a range of reporting anyway into things like our restrictive intervention. So if somebody has a prone restraint, we report on that, we report on seclusion and all of those things as well. So internally we have a good level of assurance, but what we're going to do is do a gap analysis, and if there's anything else that we think we could do to improve on that, we will do it. And then in terms of our other levels of assurance, colleagues from the ICB will come in and they do regular reviews of our inpatient units as well, and we'll have a look. So we've got somebody that's independent that's coming in and seeing the care that we provide. And then additionally, we have our Mental Health Legislation Act visits that come from the CQC. So these are unannounced visits where an inspection team will turn up, and they regularly turn up for us. It's normal for us to have CQC in our services and visiting. And as part of their reviews, they'll sort of look on the ward, but they'll also contact relatives and family members of our inpatients, and we'll talk to them as well. And if people have seen the Panorama programme and the dispatches programme, both of those were raised actually through relatives rather than through the patients. So I think just for board, it's something we take incredibly seriously as an organisation anyway, but I think this has just provided us with a platform to actually just go back and review and make sure that we've done everything that we can do. And again, working with colleagues in the ICB who also have that quality assurance oversight of what we do internally.
Thank you. David, did you want to add anything from a commissioning perspective?
No, nothing to add. Dawn's outlined really well. It's really, I would add, actually, it's just an appreciation of a really rapid response and thorough response. It's very welcome in partnership. It's great.
Just one other thing I was going to say is that as part of that quality assurance process, I've asked the team to actually invite our NEDs along to make sure that, I think you've been invited before, but to just make sure that for QA visits that we're doing, you're more than welcome to join us to actually, get out to some of the providers. So as we do our next schedule of QA visits, please feel free to actually sort of say, actually, we'd like to do that. So it would be good to have that sort of independent view from a NED as well as my team. So
your letters have the information that's happening.
We do,
so
yes.
That NEDs can volunteer.
We welcome any visitors
Exactly.
to come into any of our units.
Great,
So
that's really helpful. I think Ben, were you putting your hand up as well? Okay, Dan.
It's difficult to say all the paper was a great read given what happened and given what was in the programme, but it's a really reassuring read and it's really clear, and so thanks for the report. It's one of those where it's great to get the assurance. I guess my question's around, have we had any press, local inquiries off the back of the programme about what's happening in Dorset, and have we had to respond to anything? And it's not one of those things where we want to publicise, look, we're fine and we've checked, and but I'm just I think it's right that it's a really clear, comprehensive report to the board. Just to confirm, you shook your head, so there's no one's asked us kind of in terms of FOI, and so actually this is just a report to this board that we now take as read. But I just, 2 points. Thanks for the paper, and I just wanted to. I'd have thought there'd have been more inquiries off the back of a national programme. So interested that there's not been.
And I think the report is here because the team have been proactive in saying that's what's come out from the programme. What does it mean for us? And let's provide that assurance. So Dawn.
I was just going to say, you know, this is a constant thing that we need to keep focused on. It's not, you know, every so often we review it. We have to keep our eye on this really closely. You know, our patients are in locked units, you know, with staff, and it's absolutely essential that we have good oversight, we have good assurance about what's happening. Sometimes it doesn't go well, and in those organisations where they've had problems, you know, they weren't necessarily aware of it. So I think it's absolutely something we just need to keep our oversight on.
Patricia? I've got a bit of a thing about narrative reports. I don't think anyone should accept a narrative report as assurance. So I'm not sure what we need to do, but I think what a narrative report provides us with is reassurance, not actual assurance. So we need to find a different way of providing the evidence that says that we don't have any of those issues that were on Panorama. And when I look at the initial review, having identified those four things, if you were to take them to the extreme, are exactly what was going on in Panorama. So I think we need to work outside the board to do something that closes that assurance loop properly.
And
I'm a bit of a governance junkie, I admit that, but I don't think we should. We just had a conversation about our performance reports being narrative, and yet we're accepting a narrative report as assurance around quality and patient experience, and I'm not sure that we should.
And I guess I took part of that was that NEDS could also come along to see part of that assurance. So that would be one of the ways. But what you're talking about also is about any other data or information that we can rely on.
These are the types of patients that sometimes may not communicate to NEDS.
Yeah.
And the real issue within the documentaries that Panorama and Dispatches did, which we're having a whole conversation nationally about, is that those individuals were treated in the way they were because, like many parts of our society, they were viewed as less than. And so we need to really get underneath culture in organisations to make sure that we haven't got any pockets where people are seen as less than.
Debbie?
Yeah. Take that on board, Patricia, and I think you know, it's a really fair comment, but I think the report was meant to assure the board that actually it was taken seriously, that actually this is what is currently in existence, but also we're also going to be doing A, B and C. So I think it isn't there for assurance as a one-off. We don't need to worry about this, thank you very much, because I don't think either myself or Dawn are saying that, and I think sort of it was just this is the first look at the specifics around the concerns that were raised through the Panorama programme and others actually, and this is what's in existence, this is what more we need to do, and this is how we're going to follow it up from an ICB perspective and from a trust perspective.
I was going to say we're absolutely taking it through our board as well, so I talked about the gap analysis that we're doing as well, so absolutely if there's things we can do better, we're really keen to look at that to make sure that we can do the very best we can, because as you say, these people need the very best care and treatment that they can possibly have, and nobody should be treated in the way we should.
Using individuals with lived experience is really, really good practice.
And one of the things, sorry, if I'm just coming on one other thing, one of the things that I think would be helpful to go to Quality and Safety Committee actually, it is our reports following our QA visits that we do across the actual providers, because they do provide assurance or raise risk, because actually they are from actual visits to services and actually talking to patients and talking to relatives and talking to staff. So I think we sort of need bringing more of that through than just a narrative, as you say. So.
Cecilia, were you going to
just the choice and the allocation of someone who can be an advocate is such a key part of this process, I think. And it's how do you identify those individuals? How do you pair someone with an advocate such that they feel that they can talk to someone? That's the sort of question that I think certainly I would like to look under and see how we would do that, but also how we actually support people to either get into the sorts of services that they need, but also out of them as well. I don't know how that is reflected in some of these things. Is that part of the the support that they get in your service?
So often people will be in inpatient services because they've been sectioned under the Mental Health Act. So that means they're detained against their desire. They don't want to be detained, but they are detained under the Mental Health Act. So that's how they come into the services. So obviously we're really keen to enable people to live the very best lives that they can, and to enable them to have their sections discharged and to go back out and carry on living their lives again. So I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question, but what I can tell you is we've got a Mental Health Legislation Act committee that's chaired by one of our non-executive directors, where we look at all of our inpatient admissions. We look at what sort of section people are on, if we've complied with all of the legal elements that we need to do around the Mental Health Act. It also looks at things like when people are discharged, if they've got community treatment orders and things like that, if they're on Section 17 leaves. It's quite technical mental health.
I was going to say, it sounds like you've got all the technicalities nailed. I think it's the person stuff that I just, again, it's as long as whoever is the advocate is also reflective of the fact that you may be doing all that and that sounds great, we've done all that, but as a person, am I working towards that, living the best life I can, and is that partnering and advocacy sort of selection helping that individual to achieve that?
So every patient would be able to have an advocate, and we don't provide that ourselves, that's provided by another agency outside of our organisation. So.
But anyway, if you were talking about data, that's the sort of thing I think it'd be nice to know how that happens.
Yeah. I mean, we have a whole committee, a sub-board committee within the organisation that looks at everything around this group of patients. So, I mean, I'm very happy to work out what information would be most useful. And
might be useful for a deep dive at some point, but I'm going to move on to Dawn.
Thanks, Jenny. And this is quite a difficult question to ask, and you might say it's not the right question to answer at this point, in which case that's absolutely fine. So and I understand that this is laying out the next steps to take. In regard to the culture and leadership, I'm just wondering, as you go into this exercise, whether the data that you have got that gives us a kind of a barometer of culture when we triangulate all our data, whether there are areas that are worrying for you, or that there are that there are some concerns. I'm just wondering what the mindset is as you enter into this exercise.
So I'm not sure, are you asking specifically around if we've got certain areas of concern that we're worried about? So I mean, if we will often have a CQC inspection that will come as a result of that. So people can raise issues whichever way they want to raise them. So all of our patients will be told, if you're concerned about anything, this is how you contact CQC. So sometimes people might go to CQC, and which would then...
I mean more about the board and the executive and...
So around the organisational culture you're talking about. So, I mean, we have a strong freedom to speak up culture where we would encourage people, that would be normal and part of one of our sort of pillars of underpinning ability, that people would speak up if they saw something. We very much encourage that as an organisation. As I say, we work very closely with the voluntary sector in terms of the mental health forum, the Dorset Mental Health Forum. So we have lived experience workers in our units as well, who again are not employed by us, but would be there and seeing what was happening on a day-to-day basis. So culturally, I think it's really important that we've got the right culture, so that people do see something that's not quite right, that they feel that they're able to speak up through whichever route is the most appropriate to them.
So one of the things in the report was about the freedom to speak up, wasn't it? And the fact that there is this freedom to speak up culture, but yet there were still 4 anonymous concerns that were raised with the CQC. So I guess there's something about how does that culture get replicated so that everybody feels that they can speak up and not have to wait for to raise something anonymously. Another question for me, not for answering now, but an area of interest for me, is around how the mental health services play out depending on the demographics of the patients. So we know that there's inequalities when it comes to gender. We know that there's inequalities when it comes to race, and we're likely to see a high proportion of use by LGBT plus communities, etc. So at some point, I think it'd be really interesting to just understand what that looks like depending on the demographics, and in terms of how that's delivered, and also in terms of how staff interact, whether or not, those things, that they are cognizant of those things when they're doing those interactions.
So in terms of demographic, that goes through our mental health legislation, that committee, so it's something that we look at, because we know in particular black men, for example, are much more likely to have been under the Mental Health Act than other groups. So it's absolutely something that we do look at, and really happy to share what information would be most useful for the board.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move us on. Thank you very much for that. Debbie, I think we're staying with you, aren't we, for the Maternity and Neonatal Services report?
Sorry, can't get my screen up. No. I haven't got that, sorry.
It was a verbal.
It is a verbal,
it's the
you're right,
East,
that's why I
it's
can't
the,
find it.
yeah, it's
The response.
It's the response to East Kent, and I've already done, sorry. I was thinking, is there something else I'm supposed to be presented then?
You have already covered that, actually,
I've
haven't
actually
you?
done it, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I can't find it either.
Quality report, apologies.
All right, so thank you very much for that. So then let's... Glad somebody's on the ball.
I did leave it for a while.
Let's move us on then. So we've got... so there's no items for consent. We did have a question in advance, as is required, from a member of the public. And I'm going to read it out. It's a question from Debbie Monkhouse. It's quite a lengthy question, so I'm going to read the question first and then come back with a response. So the question is around the payment scheme. And it says, NHS England is currently running engagements on the new payment scheme and intends to begin consulting on the scheme in October/November. According to the engagement sessions on 2023 finance and payment, NHS England don't believe a variable payment linked to any acute non-elective activity would be appropriate, given the aims to reduce this demand where possible. So the questions are: A, do the ICB agree that there should be no variable payment linked to any acute non-elective activity? B, if so, how do the ICB propose to fund acute non-elective care for patients diagnosed with cancer, heart disease, stroke or other life-threatening illnesses if the fixed element for acute non-elective care is used up before the end of the financial year? And C, if not, do the ICB intend to object formally to any such proposal during the consultations on the payment scheme? And D, do the ICB agree that the inability of an NHS organisation to keep the cost of acute non-elective activity below a financial target in the plan may indicate a problem with the target and or the plan and or the forecasting model on which they are based? So those are the questions. The response is that we are aware that the payment mechanisms for 23-24 are being developed, and we are keen to understand the proposals fully and engage with the consultation process when this is issued. Whilst we understand and agree with the rationale for the potential to move back to a tariff-based payment for elective activity and for not doing so for non-elective activity, we are keen to understand the wider payment structure given the risk inherent with this approach. Specifically, the impact that increases in non-elective activity and the delays in safely discharging patients from acute hospitals has on providers' ability to deliver elective activity. Only once we have understood and considered the impact of the whole package will we be able to formulate our response. So that's our response. Rob, I don't know if you want to add anything to that. Okay.
No.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
So that brings the formal business to a close. We are now at any other business. So I'm just going to go around the table quickly to see where we are in relation to see if anybody's got any other business. So can I start, Ben? Yeah. Rob? Okay. So that concludes our business. So thank you very much to all the members of the public that joined us. Members of the board, if you can stay on the screen, those of you that are on screen for a few minutes, and if we can exit the members of the public, that would be really helpful.